summary and close slide. So I hope you will all agree that today has been really insightful in terms of the different range of issues that face us all as professionals working in all our different roles. If I just think back to Dee's presentation around cuckooing and the lack of definition around cuckooing from a safeguarding perspective, what we need to be able to do there to respond to those concerns around cuckooing is think about the different pieces of legislation that we might have where we can raise concerns. So, for example, many of the vulnerabilities that Dee talked about will be vulnerabilities that we will class for an adult at risk, for example. So that would be somebody who has got care and support needs and unable to protect themselves from the risk of abuse and neglect. So what I would urge you to do is, if you have got concerns around somebody who may well be being cuckooed because of their vulnerabilities, consider the safeguarding adults legislation and raise a safeguarding adults concern if you believe that it meets that criteria. And again, there's the exploitation around children and young people as well that we need to consider, and it's the what do we do with that? You know, we've heard a lot about the issues, but it's about that taking action and about actually doing something with the information that we've got there. If I think about Nikki Kelly's presentation around the thresholds of need, I thought that was a really good presentation that described the different services and the involvement of us all, and it does offer itself to the early indications, the prevention, the getting into families and supporting families before it becomes to the point where we learn about cases in an arena like today. One of the common themes that came through with what Nikki was saying and around the presentation that I shared with you this morning around the themes from other statutory reviews is around information sharing and that multi-agency working. Yeah. And it's definitely something that we see on a regular occurrence in many of our statutory reviews, and something that seems to be the biggest challenge that we have as professionals. I don't necessarily think the systems are set up for us to be able to do that well. But I think as a group of people who have got knowledge in different areas, that collaboration to understand where those challenges are is something that we can certainly work towards in the future. We've heard a lot today as well around professional curiosity. I mentioned before about that being a presentation that we had at the last PLI. But it's something that needs to really start to resonate with people on a regular basis. I did see one of the comments in the chat that said about GPs being good, well versed at professional curiosity, and that is right. You know, you are professionally curious, but what I suppose one of my challenges back is, are you professionally curious around the presenting factors from a medical point of view, or are you professionally curious around the contextual factors, what's happening in the home, what's happening in that environment, what is the rationale for that person coming, could there be differential diagnosis, and what are the explanations? So that's just an offering back, because whilst I noticed that comment, what we do see throughout these reviews is professional curiosity coming up over and over again. And if it is something that you feel, you know, as a group of professionals you are really good at, let's showcase that. Let's take that learning and let's show others how to do that. And that would be our one of our gifts, I think. We've also heard from Andrea around the voice of the child, and I think that also filters through some of the other presentations we've had today, and really understanding even those children, young people and adults that can't communicate, what the subtle signs that they're trying to tell us by their behaviours may not just be verbal, it may be their behaviours that are displaying indicators that we need to be considerate of. I did also notice in Andrea's slide around the compliance and the assurance, and obviously from an ICB perspective, that's where our world interfaces with providers and you all as a bunch of professionals. So the reason why we ask for some of the safeguarding assurance tools and the information we do is to try and bridge that gap around assurance and to make sure that we as a commissioner have got some oversight of what's happening in the system. That's easier said than done, as you can well imagine. You know, there's a lot of information that's happening across our city, but there's got to be a way in which we can try and build on that to try and prevent some of the cases that Andrea talked about earlier. One of the other challenges we've got, which Andrea did talk about, is cross-boundary working. We've got current safeguarding adult reviews that are in the process of an independent author being appointed, but that will look at particularly cross-boundary working, and that's cross-boundary working for adults. But we know there are ongoing reviews where there's been cross-boundary working for young people and those people in transition. So we really do need to understand how our working together spans different boundaries as well. We struggle working together and sharing information, one in individual organisations, two across our systems, and three across wider settings. So they're all things that we need to try and piece together and consider, but they're all common themes. They all come out in all the reviews that we undertake. And then finally, if I reflect on Susan Benbow's presentation, which is really relevant in the picture of Sheffield, we have had a lot of safeguarding adult and domestic homicide reviews where there has been adult family violence and carer breakdown and abuse. And I think it's really relevant to say that when we're identifying these concerns, we need to consider what actions we need to take to keep the individual, the person who is being abused or neglected, safe. So that might be, we need to consider aspects of domestic abuse and stalking and harassment, dash risk assessments, and understand the level of risk, because we've heard that in the themes and trends that actually risk assessment is a thing that we don't do particularly well. So we need to understand what the risk is, and there are tools that we can use to understand that. But first and foremost, we need to understand it as domestic abuse. We need to understand that adult family violence can portray itself as domestic abuse. We also need to look at when we see abuse from a safeguarding adults perspective, that some of that may also be domestic abuse, but there may also be other elements of emotional abuse, financial abuse that we need to be considering. So what I would say is, after the session today, to just think about some of these things in a more practical space, and what action would you take should you be faced with any of these situations. And what I would be suggesting is that you use the risk assessment tools that you've got at hand. You're professionally curious, not just about their presenting features, but what's happening in the home environment. Who is in the home environment? Does that give you a bigger picture as to the individual circumstances? And to explore things a little bit more in detail that might give you the context of the level of concern that somebody may well be facing. And then take action. Raise your safeguarding concerns, whether that be for a child, whether that be for an adult, whether that be a dash risk assessment. You know, ask for advice and support if you need it. Contact us if you need to sound anything off, if your safeguarding lead is not available. There are support services available out there, and I did see some of the comments in the chat about what is available to people. There's a carers centre. We can refer people for carers assessments. So what we'll attempt to do when we send out your information is just send you some relevant links in relation to what we've heard today. So I've probably talked quite a lot there and covered quite a bit, but I think what we really need to use today's session for is reflection of our continual learning. It's a journey. We have these statutory reviews to make sure that we are learning from the lessons, that we have got continual practice development. A lot of the recommendations that come out revolve changes in practice, and that's because they have been identified as a particular area where things could be improved. Again, I did say earlier that there are times when it's good practice, and we do try to celebrate that because we're very conscious that quite often, you know, there's the negative connotations to safeguarding, but we really want to celebrate the times where we've actually intervened at an earlier point and we have offered some protection to those who need it the most. One of my parting questions and reflections for you all to take away is, if I came back to you in 6 months' time, what would you have done differently from today's session in your practice? So I'm going to leave you with that question, because I think it's really important that not only do we sit and we listen to today's session, but we use it. We use it to make a difference. We use it to update our learning. We use it to be more curious. So I'll leave that with you. And just to say that I know there was a lot of chat around certificates. And as I mentioned at the start of the session today, in order to get your certificate, you do need to complete the feedback. There is a QR code on the screen. If you use a QR code, that'll take you to the SurveyMonkey, where you can provide your feedback, and then Natalie will be able to collate all that information and get those certificates out to you. Please do bear in mind that it's just Natalie doing that, so it may take a few weeks. Given the number that we've had on today's session, over 400, that's phenomenal. And I'm really pleased that we've had such a good turnout for today's session. It just reaffirms for me and our safeguarding team of the relevance and importance that you all have around safeguarding and the need for us all to work collectively. And again, we'll collate the questions from the chat and we'll put them in a question and answer session that we'll also send out with the information. So I just want to leave you today with a massive thank you. Thank you for all your contributions to keeping people safe. Thank you for working with us and your patience. We know you're under a lot of significant pressure. We've got a small team in the ICB. We feel that pressure too. So we're not too far removed from the difficulties that you're facing. But please do get in contact with us if you think that there's anything that we really need to help you with and that you need support with. And I mentioned earlier about my personal pledge to you all around looking at the information sharing. I have been contacted by people throughout the session. If there is anybody with a particular interest in being involved in having an initial discussion about how we might do that, please do get in touch with me. It is something that I would really value your input on, because as Maria Reid quite rightly pointed out, it's you all that are using that on a very regular basis, and it needs to be something that's supportive of you all. I'm not saying it can happen, but what I'm saying is we can have the conversations to see what we can do and how we might be able to improve what we're doing already. So thank you very much for your contributions today, and hopefully I'll see you all soon.
Thank you, Kitty.